The Super Mario Bros. Movie is indeed the greatest video game adaptation ever made because, unlike pretty much every video game adaptation in history, it actually feels like the game. You have the set pieces, you have the story, you have the characters, you have the general vibe and feel. People are complaining about the plot of Super Mario Galaxy, but the simple fact of the matter is, saving the princess is a pretty standard Mario esque plot. These movies have a kind of authenticity to them that kind of far surpasses pretty much every other video game adaptation ever made. Whether it's Sonic the Hedgehog or that stupid Castlevania Netflix cartoon or whatever else you could possibly name. Like, the simple fact of the matter is, Mario is a bigger, better brand, and the film adaptation clears all of that. It is a very extremely high quality adaptation, one that will be enjoyed for years to come. Kids today still go back and watch the old Super Mario Bros. Super Show or, the old Donkey Kong cartoon, and I think we're going to see a similar pattern hold up for these animated Mario movies, where over time they are going to be seen as all-time classics. However, although I think it is pretty much undeniable how popular and successful the Super Mario Bros. Movies are, the simple fact of the matter is we've kind of moved on to the next major cope. Okay, we acknowledge that these are some of the best video game adaptations ever made, but when it comes to animated films, there are a lot of people in the community who will try and tell you that the Super Mario Bros. Movie is somehow lacking or that it's not very good. But because of its authenticity, because this is the best video game adaptation ever made, and considering video games are actually more successful and more popular than any film franchise on the planet, animated or otherwise, the Super Mario Bros. Movie, by its nature, is already way more popular and successful than pretty much any animated film ever made. Essentially what we're dealing with now is kind of the reputations of these films rather than their actual quality. Like, the simple fact of the matter is, Super Mario Bros. Is the best animated film ever made, and I thought that I would produce a video kind of demonstrating this fact for you today. So I went ahead and brought up a list of the greatest animated movies ever made on IMDB. And we're going to go through all of the ones that I've seen and kind of break them down and explain why the Super Mario Galaxy movie is by far superior. And we are, of course, starting with The Land Before Time, which is very interesting, actually, because this is actually one of those movies that I watched a while back. I actually made a video on it, on how surprised I was by, just how it wasn't as good as I remembered. Watching this, I felt that it was kind of forced, it was kind of lazy, it kind of had a cop-out ending. I felt as if, the entire idea of dinosaurs running around this dark, bleak hellscape. As a kid, it was very, very entertaining and very interesting, but as an adult, it just comes off as very shallow. I wondered, growing up, why we kind of see Jurassic Park as the de facto, dinosaur brand and don't really care for The Land Before Time. And I do think a reason for that is that The Land Before Time has this kind of inauthenticity to it, where it just doesn't really feel as if this would be an actual dinosaur film. Because even though it takes place in prehistoric times, even though it takes place supposedly right when the dinosaurs are supposed to be extinct, inexplicably, but there's one place where you can go where there's still plenty of food and you can live and be happy and stuff like that. Considering this is about animals that, went extinct, it all just kind of feels flat and just kind of feels like this massive cop-out ending. It's really interesting in this regard because the Super Mario movies are actually way better dinosaur films than The Land Before Time, because Super Mario Galaxy also has a T-Rex and also has a chase scene, and it also, demonstrates Yoshi running away from the dinosaur. So in a lot of ways, it's a lot better at what The Land Before Time should have been about, which is like surviving in this hostile area, running from other dinosaurs, and just kind of like trying to survive. And when you take into consideration all the sequels that became more childish, that became less dark, that became less focused on like, what kids found appealing about Land Before Time, you really get this sense that it was a brand that really fell off over time. A brand that had potential to be something great, but completely lost sight of like what made it interesting and fun for its audience. Because I remember watching this growing up and being like really taken aback by how bleak it was in some aspects. But again, the sequels existing kind of ruined that. And this is something that people don't understand about like Super Mario Galaxy, is that like it is an extraordinary sequel in which it advances the characters, it introduces new aspects to the lore, and it does not feel like a simple rehash of the original. That's something that I think a lot of people don't understand about Super Mario Galaxy, is that it is a truly high quality sequel that elevates and makes the original better. We're so used to seeing lazy cop-out sequels coming from these animated films that a lot of people have not processed how good Super Mario Galaxy actually is. So yes, Super Mario Galaxy and Super Mario Bros. Are far better than The Land Before Time. All right, next we have Robin Hood from Disney, a film I have not seen in many, many years. And I've seen a lot of people come out and try and say this is some base traditional like story and that this is like, an all-time overlooked classic. I'm sure it's just boomer nostalgia, because like I remember the last time I watched this, on Disney Channel, like years and years ago. And, I'm fired up to watch this thing. I'm so excited for it. And then I watch it. And keep in mind, this is like, I've been watching a ton of Disney films, like back to back to back on the channel. So when you watch Robin Hood and you see the characters, you see like the animation, you see what's happening, and you start noticing a couple of things. First of all, the reused character designs, because like you have like Baloo as Little John, you have like the snake from Jungle Book as like the advisor, you have all these like weird rehash characters. Like it's just bizarre. They couldn't come up with original designs. They couldn't come up with something like a fresh or original or exciting. They couldn't like put in work. Okay, and then like there's the more egregious thing. The thing that really kills this film for me is how much animation they reused in this film. Because, like, I remember watching this, and, like, they're doing the dancing sequence, and, like, you can see clear as day that they, like, traced over the animation for the Aristocats, where they danced with, like, the palms against it. Like, it looks awful, because, like, you're comparing, like, animation that was made for, like, cats, like, more realistic cats versus, like, anthropomorphic animals. So you look at like Robin Hood, and not only is it reused, not only is it lazy, not only is it cheap, it's also it doesn't suit the characters like at all. Like you look at this reused animation and you realize just how cheap and lazy it actually is. Like Robin Hood is just a complete disaster of a film for that reason, in that they had no ability to make something fresh, new, or original. Like, when you compare it to something like the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which is wildly gorgeous, which has completely original animation that, like, is just looks fantastic, like, it's not even really a competition. Now, I know a lot of people will say that, like, the animation doesn't matter in this medium, and I would say otherwise. I would say it's very important. So, like, in order to have, like, fully original animation, because this is a business, like, this is what people want to see, is something original and exciting. Like, just reusing assets because you can, people like me who see a lot of this stuff, it completely kills the experience, right? Like, this alone disqualifies the film as being anything noteworthy or interesting. All right, next we have Cars, and this really goes into like the problem with modern animation. I think something you'll notice a lot on this list. Disney kind of dominates, like because Disney kind of has a monopoly on animation, and because they've always been seen as like the innovators for this field. Just by nature of them, owning Pixar and like producing these movies, uh, people tend to like overhype these films and go see them like no matter how mid they are. And I think Cars is a very, very good example because like, so many people when this movie came out were willing to come out and say that like, yeah, the whole idea of like anthropomorphic cars was like ridiculous. Like the setting doesn't make any sense. It's not appealing. It's not interesting. Not even for racing fans. And the plot itself is just a reskin version of like Doc Holliday featuring an anthropomorphic race car. Okay, like there's no creativity put into it. There's no thought. It's not funny. It looks good, but again, there's more to a film than a film needs more than like good visuals to keep you engaged. And in fact, I would say the animation only really shines in that like first opening scene where he's like, zigzagging through the cars and he gets into all these like, situations. Like the film as a whole just doesn't really do a whole lot with its concept. Lightning McQueen does grow and change over time, but the difference between that and Super Mario Bros. Is that like the change is kind of a foregone conclusion. Like, because of the nature of these films, like obviously the character is going to change, the character has to change, and there's just no real thought put into like how that's going to happen. Okay, there's no real thought like put into the execution. It just kind of like happens over the course of like a week. The Mario movies in comparison have much more like subtle long-term storytelling. Like again, the way that like Bowser changes throughout the Super Mario Galaxy movie is just phenomenal and far surpasses anything I would say in any Pixar movie ever. Like again, Pixar is, I would argue, like one of the banes of our existence when it comes to animation because for a long time they were coasting by entirely on their reputation, right? They were coasting entirely on their reputation of like innovating CG visuals and not really on their storytelling or creating interesting concepts. Even back in the day, like even back in their golden age period, their films weren't particularly that well thought out or interesting. And I think Cars is probably the quintessential example of that. Because this is a generic concept that was reskinned with CG visuals in an animated movie and sold to children, right? These are not interesting ideas. They are not unique, fresh, or exciting. And what ends up happening is that Cars is in an interesting place when it comes to like Pixar's legacy, where it's considered to be one of the all-time best in the golden age, one of the most profitable movies ever made, and yet like there's just this feeling around it that like, this is a film that is only lumped in with these other films because of the period it came out and because of Pixar's legacy. If this film came out in like 2010 or 2012, like, people would be a lot more comfortable labeling it as part of the decline or maybe the reason for the decline. Instead, because, Up came out after this and Wall-E came out after this, like there's this like feeling among fans that Cars was like, the worst of like Pixar's golden age instead of, a symbol of their ongoing decline. It's embarrassing, but that's just how it is. Is that Pixar fans just are not willing to let go of their ill-gotten reputation. Next, we have Megamind, which I think is a really good example of why I hate DreamWorks as a company. Because I've been very critical of Disney over the years. Disney, at least, is relevant. But DreamWorks is a really interesting studio because all they do is just rip off like obscure children's books that no one has ever heard of, and just make really shitty, like awful knockoff properties of them. Shrek is a good example. The Bad Guys is a good example, and I don't know about Megamind's history or development, but at its core, it's just kind of a proto The Boys in a way. You know, it's kind of proto Invincible in that sense, where it's just like, ooh, evil Superman, but he's an incel. And it tries framing it in that way, where this guy is like, you know, it's the Superman mythos, but kind of like, you know, a role reversal thing for all the characters, right? Well, except the love interest, because of course the love interest isn't going to do anything. Yeah, like it's like the idea where like the Superman is evil and selfish, and then like the villain is actually just misunderstood, which of course is like, you know, kind of a woke subversion and needs to get called out for what it is. But it's also not that clever or interesting. You know, Megamind is not an interesting character. You know, Metro Man is not an interesting character, especially not what happens to him. And Titan, in a weird way, is one of like the weakest animated villains ever. In that sense, where like this is a guy purely motivated by his selfish lust for respect he didn't earn. You know, it's I think a lot of people feel as if this is an original concept, but for me personally, someone who's read a lot, like again, it's a pretty typical like, you know, power corrupt story. There's nothing really all that special or interesting about it. Like again, it's not funny, it's not interesting, it's not sweet. You know, it's just a sloppy movie that DreamWorks fans hype up because they really don't have anything in their back catalog that is worthy of any attention or respect. The Wind Rises. Oh man, I have not seen this since like, I don't know, 2012. Possibly my most hated Miyazaki movie. I know I go off on Spirited Away a lot because, you know, I've seen that one several times, and it's very frustrating how that movie is structured, and just, well, we'll probably get to that when it's on the list, but like, you know, I have seen The Wind Rises, and like, this is the film that really, truly, genuinely made me hate Hayao Miyazaki and like Studio Ghibli, because I think it really emphasizes their unique weaknesses in Japanese animation. Because like, obviously I love Japan, you know, I love like, you know, a lot of their creators, I love a lot of things that come out, but like, one of the things I've noticed is that the West tries to do this thing where they try and say that like Miyazaki is one of the all-time goats, and that Miyazaki is one of the best, and Miyazaki is this all-time great creator, and it's simply not true. Like, this guy is a pacifistic retard. Okay, he's a feminist, he's a commie, he's like, he hates Japan and like everyone around him. He's a horrible person, a horrible human being, and a horrible film creator. Because like, this guy will legit just make things up while he's like making the movie. And that just leads into like these weird like plot contrivances and just weird structural problems. You know, Spirited Away is a really good example where like, they don't really set up anything that happens in it at all. You set up the first half, which is actually really fun and really like invigorating for the first 45 minutes, and then like the last half of the movie is just some one giant cop out for like everything that happened before. You're just resolving all these plot threads in like the laziest way imaginable. Like, you know, I hate the way Spirited Away like plays out and how it was made, and well, like, The Wind Rises, in a lot of ways, is worse. Because, you know, this is supposed to be historical fiction. And yet, it just comes off as pandering and lazy. You know, it does this thing that Miyazaki always does, where it's like, oh, yeah, war is bad. Oh, so, like, this guy, he's only making planes because, like, he has to if he's going to fulfill his dream of making planes. Or like, again, it has that like anti-war message, which is very prevalent in like Miyazaki's work. But it also does this like weird thing where it just kind of like avoids talking about like the reality of what this guy is doing. And it's also like not very historically accurate, because I think they make up I think the love interest is just straight up made up, and it's just all like really forced. Like the whole idea of it, of like, oh yes, you make planes because you love them, but ooh, they're gonna be used for evil purposes. Like it's just stupid. Like it doesn't really resonate with me at all. Like it's just lazy, asinine, just completely ridiculous. I don't know if I'll ever watch the film again, because I really hated this one. But that's kind of what I remember of it. Of it just being Miyazaki, I think, at his most pandering. Okay, I actually saw Zootopia for the first time recently, and it kind of struck me how generic of a concept it is. And I think this is a reoccurring problem with Disney, where like instead of creating something new and original, it's like, oh yeah, it's just a buddy cop movie, but they're all animals. Eh. So like that's all Zootopia is that it's a bunch of animals like getting into like living in this city together and getting into like animal based crime. So like they're getting into like characters are discriminated against because of their size or because of what species they are. They and like all of it just leads into this weird contrivance of a plot that just doesn't really feel as well thought out or engaging as something like Super Mario Galaxy. I think a really good example of how unoriginal this plot actually is when they go see like The Godfather, right? And it's just a parody of The Godfather. Like he has the music, he has the tuxedo. Oh, but he's really small. Oh, like Mr. Big. Yeah, that's what they call him. And it's like it's all just like a bunch of references that kids would never get. Actually, that's a very interesting point, is that one of the big criticisms towards the Mario movie is that it's loaded to references from its own brand, from its own franchises that Nintendo owns. It has Fox McCloud and it, Samus as a cameo. Like, you have, like, Donkey Kong in the first one. Like, meanwhile, you have Disney films where they keep, like, a lot of their most critical moments are like directly derivative of like other properties, like and Zootopia having the Godfather sequence is a very, very good example of that. Like it doesn't do anything new or interesting with the idea. It's just a reference for the sake of having a reference. Next, we have Porco Rosso, a movie that I saw for the first time last year in theaters, and I did not care for it. I do like it quite a bit better than something like Spirited Away, or especially Kiki's Delivery Service, or I think even Spirited Away, because, it has a male protagonist, which is very unusual for Miyazaki. But, like, yeah, Porco Rosso, an airline pilot who turned into a pig, it is a pointless movie. Okay, nothing in it like matters at all. Like the characters don't make any sense. Like the plot is contrived, and then it just kind of ends. Like it's just I just find myself very, very confused about like what this movie is even supposed to be about. Like, oh, he goes to get his plane fixed, and then it's just like it's just such a weird film in that sense, where you can kind of see like Miyazaki's political leanings like on full display of just how much contempt he has for like Italy from the time period. It's like it just doesn't really make any sense, especially because it's probably one of the most blatant lolicon-ish kind of coded projects I've seen from Miyazaki, in which the young girl kind of has like a romantic interest in the pig and even kisses him at the end. And it does that like weird thing that Miyazaki does where it tries to come off as wholesome when it's actually pretty weird and just kind of like obviously leaning into like his obvious lolicon fixation. Like it's just, come on. And it also has that problem where it does that thing where it's like, oh, yes, this little girl is actually a way better engineer than any of my sons. And it's just like, yeah, no. Okay, don't even, like, bring that up as a joke, okay? It's like, it's not a thing that happens in reality ever, okay? I'm so sick of, like, the gadgeteer girl trope. Like, it's just pure fiction, and I don't want to see it again. But yeah, it's obviously just pandering to like Miyazaki's weird. It's so weird because Miyazaki like presents himself as a feminist. He presents himself as like liking strong, independent women, and yet in a lot of ways, like at the center of it all, like the girl is something the characters fight over. And yeah, you could argue it's played like a joke and not taken all that seriously, but that's just the reality of it. Is that like these characters are fighting over the girl. So all that talk about how smart she is, about like what she wants out of her life, what she wants to do, like none of that really means anything because like Miyazaki puts her in this position where she has to be with this where she kind of has like this fun adventure with this pig. It's just contrived and really, really lazy. Like, both of the Mario movies are far superior. Like, they have better female leads. They have, like, a better relationship, and like, there's potential for sequels. There's more development to be had out of these characters. Like, Porco Rosso falls apart before the film is even over. And I think that really goes to show you just how lazy and stupid this film actually is. Okay, Frozen is probably one of the worst animated movies in recent memory. Like, I was very surprised when I watched Frozen for the first time and realized how subversive and, like, disgusting it actually is. Like, Frozen is really, really strange in, like, what it tries to present and what it tries to portray. Like, and it really is, I think, what I would call, like, the first or, like, the most openly woke, like, Disney film ever. Like, The Princess and the Frog wasn't nearly this bad. The one with diversity wasn't as bad as this. Because at least you could argue that, like, it promoted good values and it had, like, a good, like, presented, like, this good idea and this good, like, conflict between characters. Like, Frozen, in comparison, is just, like, woke, subversive garbage. In the sense where, like, Anna, the entire film hinges around these two sisters, right? So Anna and Elsa. And, like, the way it's presented is that, like, it has these weird, like, lesbian undertones where, like, it's the love between sisters that breaks the curse at the end or whatever. And, like, you just have this, like, vibe that, like, the creators wanted to go in a different direction with it. You have this vibe that they wanted to, like, do way more with it and, like, explore way more degenerate topics. Like, they kind of shit all over the classic, like, fairy tale prince cliche, right? Like, oh, Anna, if only somebody loved you. Like, it's just such a bad twist. And people have called it out for being a bad twist. But I think what's also really, like, disgusting about it is just how the film just doesn't really have much to do with, like, anything. Okay, like, again, in theory, I think, like, Elsa would be the antagonist, right? Like, Elsa should be thought of as the antagonist, and yet, like, the film just goes out of its way to try and, like, justify her actions, and instead, like, make this twist villain out of nowhere that doesn't work, right? Like, Frozen is a complete mess. And I think today it's only beloved by kids who saw it when it first came out. I remember when this came out, and you would see, like, the Disney adults, like, sitting around their stupid coffee tables, and they would just go, like, kids don't play Pokemon anymore. They're into Frozen. And it's just like, yeah, get out. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. And that's the really interesting thing, is that Frozen has remained Disney's most profitable brand, but that is only because of the aesthetics and the vibe. At its core, it's, like, a pretty controversial movie, especially among adults. And I think by the time that, like, they really go, like, mask off with how woke it is by Frozen 3, I don't even know what happens in Frozen 2, but, like, by the time they, like, go full mask off with how woke it's meant to be, like, I imagine people will turn on it, Like, I see this movie the same way that, like, I would look at something like, American Beauty, or, like, Blazing Saddles, or, like, Star Trek, where, like, people just didn't really process how woke it was at the time. Like, Frozen, I think, is just, like, a disaster of filmmaking. And it really just goes to show you just how much stronger Nintendo's brand is than Disney right now. Shrek 2 was never funny. It was never good. It never promoted a good message, right? Like Shrek 2, Shrek is a really interesting franchise because I remember when this thing first came out and people thought it was like really cool and really badass, how it was really funny. And yet, if you're like me and actually like, respect traditional fairy tales, if you actually read a lot of fantasy, like it just comes off as like pandering to like retarded teenagers obsessed with like pop culture. Right? That's the reality of Shrek 2, is that it's not a particularly good film. All it is just kind of like the typical subversion of like Western fantasy archetypes. It's just like shitting all over. And that's what people find amusing about it. That's what people like about it. But the simple fact of the matter is, like, these archetypes are classical archetypes for a reason and have stood the test of time. And I think Shrek 2, and especially like every other film in the franchise, in comparison, has like aged relatively poorly. Shrek isn't even like a 2 decade old franchise. Yeah, it's 2 decades old now, and it's already kind of showing its age. While in comparison, people still are discovering like the beauty and the appeal of like something like Sleeping Beauty, which is a way better film than this. And like the Mario movie, I think does a better job of like, emphasizing, a wholesome relationship, having intense action while being like very adherent to like traditional character archetypes, right? Shrek 2 just doesn't really work. Like outside of the whole like subversion of like typical fairy tale stuff, like it doesn't really offer anything fresh, original, or exciting. It's just satirical, but the satire is like rooted in tearing down things that are pure and good. And as a result of that, like it's not effective. It doesn't mean anything. Like it doesn't really like have a point to it. Like again, it does this thing where like, well, true beauty is on the inside. Oh, like true love is about how much you love the other person, and like as if like the characters in classic Disney films didn't love each other. That's the problem with this film. That's why it all falls apart. Is if like all the things that it's making fun of make perfect sense in the context of those original movies. Not just when they were made, but even today, they are still universally appealing and popular. And I think Shrek really struggles to understand that concept. I think a big part of why kids love Shrek was that like it was quite a bit more action focused than Disney films, because like they're always getting into fights and there's always like more badass things happening, and like there's things like that. I think in a lot of ways the Mario movies do a better job at having nonstop action. Peach is doing things. You got like Peach is better than Fiona, by the way. You have like the Mario Bros. Like that crazy fight scene at the end of the first movie. Like it's so much better than anything Shrek has ever done. I remember watching the climax for Shrek 2, like back in the day, and just being really surprised at like how contrived it was. So you're telling me they're just gonna build like a gigantic gingerbread man and then just leave it to die while they just go through the credit scene? Like it's not funny. Like it's just mean-spirited and stupid. And I think that's like why the Mario movies are just so much better. And a lot of people have pointed this out, is that they aren't mean-spirited in the least. Like in any other movie, there's a scene in the Mario Galaxy movie where they're fighting a Cheep Cheep. And like, Luigi jumps on it. It spits out a bunch of water on Mario. And I think in any other movie, like, Mario would have gotten mad at Luigi. But instead, they just look at each other and laugh. And, first of all, that's like a more organic thing to have happen. But second of all, it's just better than what Shrek would do. Shrek would have this entire, like, sequence where they would get mad at each other, and that would, like, drive the entire plot. And, like, the Mario movie, like, it promotes better values. Okay, like, and that's what I really like about it. That's what I've always liked about it. Like, the Super Mario Galaxy movie just promotes better values than Shrek ever will. Next, we have Mulan. And this is a really interesting film because this is like the feminist power fantasy like Disney film. This is the one they all like look up to. This is the one they all want to be like, "Oh, I'm going to dress up like a boy and go to war." Like never mind how bad of an idea it is. Like no matter how contrived it is. Like it's very interesting watching this movie as an adult and realizing just how forced it is. So you're telling me that like Mulan goes to war, epically fails, and then like becomes a hero through like, an extremely contrived circumstance, and then gets kicked out for being a girl, right? Like, Shang thinks she's gay, but then he realizes that she's actually a girl, and then he's like curses. Like, I thought I was gonna have my femboy like bottom, and then he just sends her away because he's so mad. Again, it's also forced. It's also contrived. Like it just has this weird like gender role like thing that's like kind of 90s style progressivism. The idea that like girls can do anything boys can do. It's just not true. It never was true, and it's a root problem in like what we're going through today. Like I think a lot of millennial women like they got their worldview from this movie. And what ended up happening is that they just developed this very toxic, view of the world in which they genuinely think they could have done stuff like that or, become the hero or done these things. And it was just unbelievably forced. There are just so many, better martial arts movies that, I don't even understand why you would ever watch Mulan unless you were, an obsessive Disney fan. But again, I think this movie is kind of rooted in it's just the general cultural decline of Disney at the time. I would say much like with Pocahontas, it just kind of felt as if they were already pushing the woke messaging. It just wasn't as pronounced as it was now, or people overlooked it, or maybe the messaging is why these movies weren't as successful as they used to be, right? Again, they were already pushing these woke progressive policies with these films, and they just don't work. So in comparison, what you get out of the Mario Galaxy movie is that you get way more well-rounded, interesting characters, right? Where you have Princess Peach, going to save Rosalina, and initially she doesn't want Mario and Luigi to come along with her because, somebody has to look after the kingdom, right? But then they, then they go after her anyway, after, the castle is abducted or taken away. And, and again, they go on this adventure together. And I think it's, it does a way better job, I think, depicting Peach as, an actual human being. It does a way better job, showing her growing relationship with Mario and, how they treat each other and, just how sweet it is. It comes off as a lot more genuine than, Shang thinking he's gay. Okay? It's just so much better than what Mulan fucking does. And I'm very interested, I'm very curious to see, if at some point people realize just how well written of a character Princess Peach actually is in the Mario movies. Because you keep seeing people do this thing where they say she's a girl boss, and yet somehow characters like Mulan just don't get the same label, even though that there's so much more pandering. A girl boss by definition is someone that doesn't need a man. And that simply isn't true for Princess Peach, because she welcomes Mario and appreciates everything he does for her, and that's what makes her such a compelling female character. I have seen Kiki's Delivery Service more than any other Ghibli film. Okay, and I hate this movie. It's one of the weirdest things ever for me, because the aesthetics are nice and I like the location, I like the vibes of the movie, but when it comes to what actually happens in it, it just really frustrates me, and just really it just goes to show you just how much Miyazaki fetishizes youth, in this sense, where he's just obsessed with little kids, particularly girls. Actually, no, I don't know if he's ever focused on a little boy. Yeah, stereotypical pragmata behavior. But yeah, Kiki's Delivery Service is just this film where like nothing happens. This girl moves to a new place and opens a delivery service, like disappoints her parents, and is just like an all around just embarrassingly boring film. Like this film is like, it's the kind of thing that people say they like because they think it's artsy or because it has like, it means something to them or that they like it so grounded. But for me personally, like I feel like there are just so many other better examples of this kind of thing, especially when it comes to TV anime. I imagine that there are dozens of like anime films out there that are just way better than this and like tackle like the same subject matter like better. Like Kiki in a way, it just feels as if like it's very, very, very forced. Where it has this idea where like, oh yeah, she's growing up. Oh, and it's so bad. Oh, she loses her magic. It doesn't feel like it has a point to it. Like, it feels as if like it's very, very lazy and very, very poorly thought out. It feels as if like it's something that was created just to fetishize youth. Like that's kind of that's always been my core criticism of it, is that like it doesn't actually feel like this is something that would ever actually happen. It was just something like made to like appease like Miyazaki's lolicon fetish. And I think for that reason, like it's not really a film that anybody should respect or pay attention to. Like again, I think Miyazaki's a hack filmmaker in general. But Kiki, I think, is like kind of the epitome of that feeling of just like, this film is about nothing. Like, nothing happens in this movie. Howl's Moving Castle was so boring that I never even finished it. Like, I remember buying this on Blu-ray, popping it in, knowing nothing about it, and then I started watching it, and then it's just like, oh yeah, the guy has a moving castle. Why is it moving? To avoid paying taxes. It's just like, really? Like, that's what you came up with? That's your movie? Like, and the girl becomes old, and it's like, again, it's just a really boring concept. Like, it doesn't work, and, like, there's nothing really all that memorable about it. Like, again, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but, like, again, I couldn't even finish it. That's how boring this was. Okay, it's been a long time since I've actually seen Despicable Me. Like, I think I saw it, like, around the time it came out. It was on TV. This might have been before even, like, the sequels came out or whatever. So, yeah, high point of the movie's popularity. This thing came out, and it won a lot of people over. Why? I think because it didn't cater to, like, the DreamWorks or Disney formula. Where Illumination came out, and they were just like, yeah, we're just going to make a fun, goofy movie for kids. Crazy concept, right? I felt that the movie was too immature and that it didn't really make the kid characters like likable. Like, as I recall, it's just like he forms a bond with them and like starts liking them or whatever, and it's like it doesn't really feel natural or organic. But when you consider the age range for like the target audience for this, that's probably the problem. But again, like if you're making a movie like this, and I think this is one of the reasons why the Mario movies are so much better, is that they do a better job, like, appealing to all ages. Of having, like, a vibe that's appealing to, like, everybody. Like, something like Despicable Me, and I think Illumination in general, like, they do this thing where they're, like, only made for kids. And it's kind of the opposite problem of what Disney and DreamWorks do, where they try to make things too adult, and they make things not appealing to kids at all. Despicable Me is just... It's just too simplistic, I think, to be a truly great film like the Super Mario movies. Like, I feel as if this film just didn't really hit the mark in what it was trying to do. Batman Mask of the Phantasm. Wow, that's number 49 on this list. That's embarrassing. Like, again, Batman is like one of the worst characters in fiction. The Cat'll Have Fangs. My next book is kind of entirely about that, actually, how much Batman sucks. But Batman is just, this lazy, half-assed, like, generic, like, poorly thought-out character that's a ripoff of, like, much better like Pulp Fiction heroes, like the Shadow, like Sherlock Holmes, like the Scarlet Pimpernel. Like Batman is just like a pastiche of like way better things that came before it, and the inability of like fans to accept that is just embarrassing. Okay, people love doing this thing where they're like, "Oh yes, Batman. It's so complex and it's so original, and the animated series is the best like cartoon ever made." And I'm just like, there's a reason anime blew up like after BTAS. Okay, like anime blew up because it was so much better and higher quality than even the best that the West had to offer. And in fact, like a lot of it was animated in Japan. So again, so much for your so much for your mindset that like Batman was like some was some high quality brand. That Batman was some like 10 out of 10 thing. Like again, I haven't seen Mask of the Phantasm. I don't really care to, but like if it's anything like BTAS, like it's something that coasts entirely off this idea that Batman is deeper and more complex than it actually is. And I think that's like why the Mario movies are better, because like the Mario movies are very, very open about what they are and what they want to be. And then like Batman does this thing where it's like, oh yes, I'm totally gonna like consider moving away from being Batman in this movie, and it's not gonna happen. Like the writers would never let that happen. And this is why like the brand feels so forced and why it feels so lazy, is that like Batman is just like a character that's sold to little kids, and the fans are just people who never grow past it, who never read other books, who never learn about Batman's like primary inspirations, who never learn about the better movies that are out there. They just blindly consume products just for having the bat signal on it. And that's why Batman is such a sad IP. And obviously this kind of extends to every other Batman product as well. All the cartoons, all the recent live actions, especially the most recent one. Like, they're all lazy and they're all unbelievably stupid. Yeah, I remember seeing Kung Fu Panda in a drive-in and just being really like baffled that this movie was as popular as it is, because it's about some random fat guy who's told that he's the chosen one and that he has to do battle with this like amazing martial artist. And he doesn't learn anything, he doesn't grow. He's all just like, he's the best at martial arts because like he just is, okay? He doesn't work for it. He doesn't like, he's just fat, and that means that his blubber can just take like a lot of like the crazy hits that like is dished out towards him, okay? Like, it's contrived, it's lazy, it's stupid, it's not all that interesting, it's not funny, and like it's really kind of shocking, honestly, like how much better the Super Mario movies are at having action sequences than this stuff. Because Kung Fu Panda is essentially a pastiche of martial arts films, in which like animals go out and they like use their respective styles to like fight each other in like kung fu inspired battles. And what's interesting about that is that like, well, there are better movies like this. You can watch like a Jackie Chan movie or a Bruce Lee movie or like any classic like Chinese, Hong Kong produced like martial arts film, and you'll get a better experience than this. But when it comes to Mario specifically, like, you're not going to find anything like that. You'll never find like the power-ups, you'll never see the creativity, you'll never see like, characters like, fighting each other in a way, you'll never see the elaborate obstacle courses. Like, the Mario movies are just way better at being unique than something like this. And that's a major problem with Kung Fu Panda, is that it is so lazy, it is so contrived, and yet, like, people worship it because, like, oh, man, it's a panda. Oh, and he's doing kung fu. Oh, like, it is embarrassing. Like, DreamWorks should be ashamed of themselves. Now, I actually really like Tangled. I would say it's probably one of my favorite movies ever because of how it deals with abuse and how it goes over like Rapunzel's trauma, and she's cute as fuck and all that. I love Tangled, like, for a lot of reasons, but like at the end of the day, the romance sucks, the action sucks, The comedy is not all there, and the climax, as emotionally driven as it is kind of like lackluster for an animated film like this. Okay, like in a lot of ways, the film could have been a lot better. And although I maintain it's way better than something like Frozen, like the simple fact of the matter is, the Super Mario Bros. Movie is better than this. Because it does have better characters. It does have better action. It does have better comedy. It doesn't have any unnecessary musical sequences. It's able to focus on, like, emotional bits. It's able to, like, get more out of the characters, okay? Like, Tangled is great, but it's not as good as the Mario movies. Chicken Run sucks. Mario is better. Like, I've never understood, like... I don't understand people's obsession with this fucking movie. Because I remember seeing, like, again, whenever I see the Wallace and Gromit animation of, like, the stop-motion bullshit, I'm just like, people need to move past this, okay? Because people see stop-motion and they're just like, oh, man, it's so good, it's so good, it's so good. I remember watching this when I was a kid. It's like, no, it wasn't that good. Stop it. Like, for some reason... people have this idea that Chicken Run is, like, some top 10, like animated films ever. And yet, like, it's just pure shit. There's nothing interesting about it. It's not funny. It's not interesting. Like I don't understand people's obsession with these fucking movies. Okay? Like, grow up. Like, these are the most boomer-coded animated films in existence. Like, I don't want to hear about them. I don't want to talk about them. I don't want to see them. Get them out of my face. South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut. Have not seen it because, I'm not a fucking spurg. I'm not a stoner who thinks South Park is like, my Bible, okay? Like, South Park was always dumb. It was always lazy. It was always stupid. It was always poorly animated. And I think today people are more willing to acknowledge those things, Like, it's time we get to that point where we realize that South Park as a brand was built entirely on shock value, and it has nothing of value to contribute to anything. Mario is going to stand the test of time far beyond what South Park will ever manage to accomplish. Wreck-It Ralph, I have not seen. And I imagine it's for the same reason that I don't see a lot of other things, is that it feels like it would just be video game reference the movie. And I think it's a very interesting thing how people glaze Wreck-It Ralph while downplaying the far superior Super Mario Galaxy movie. Because, Wreck-It Ralph is something that's superficially associated with video games. Like, oh, it has Sonic in it. Like, oh, it's kind of like an arcade. Oh, like, oh, she's a glitch. And, like, the reality of it is, it's not as well made or interesting as the Super Mario movie. Like, again, it doesn't feature, like, anything that would actually appeal to an actual gaming fan. Okay? It's just a movie with an arcade as a setting. That's it. Like, it's Toy Story, but for arcades. There's nothing original, fresh, or exciting about it. And honestly, like, I do think it's something that we do need to call out, is that, like, if Wreck-It Ralph is glazed and Super Mario Galaxy is downplayed, like, obviously, we need to toss out, like, whoever has those, like, hot takes, because that's not something an actual gaming fan would ever say. Yeah, the last movie I've seen in theaters was Princess Mononoke. One of my favorite films of all time. The best animated movie ever made, in my opinion. I love Princess Mononoke. I know I complain about Miyazaki a lot, but Mononoke is like the one film where he gets away from his like typical Miyazaki-isms, and he kind of creates like a nuanced, interesting story. The Mario movies are better than this. Like, the simple fact of the matter is, Mononoke is way too long, and even though it does a way better job of, like, telling the man versus nature story, it does a way more nuanced job of telling the man versus nature story than something like, say, Avatar or, like, Pocahontas. It still kind of has that, like, weird anti-human bent to it. And even though I can kind of sit here and pretend that, like, oh, yes, Lady Eboshi, she's right about everything. Like, that's not really what the movie wants you to think. And that's kind of my problem with it, is that, like, even though it goes to extraordinary lengths to try and make Eboshi sympathetic and to make the situation more nuanced, like, it really does go out of its way to make, like, nature look beautiful and elegant while making, like, developed Irontown look like complete shit. with like no hope for improvement at all. Like again, it's like it comes very, very close. The closest ever, I think, to like telling this story properly, but it just doesn't go like that extra mile. Like it's just not really capable to because of like the creator's biases. Now, like I think in a way, the reason why the Super Mario movies are better than this is because it's actually willing to accept what it actually is. Is that like it's not that serious, it's not that big of a deal, and it's able to revel in it. So it doesn't really have those kind of hang-ups that hold Princess Mononoke back. Okay, you know, Mario Galaxy is about going to save a princess from evil, and that's all it is. You know, like, yeah, there are things that happen in it, and it doesn't have as complex as a story, but it's still very entertaining. It's still very fun. It's still very exciting. And that's something that Princess Mononoke really struggles with, because I love this movie. It is way too long. Like, there are way too many sections where, like, Ashitaka is going back and forth between the two sides. Like, no, we don't need to fight. And it's just, like, it's kind of contrived, especially towards the end, where, like, you know, the fighting just kind of stops. And it's just, like, really? Really? Like, I remember watching Princess Mononoke for the first time, and like a lot of Miyazaki films, like, I just hated the ending. Because they have this way of just ending on, like, the most, like, contrived way imaginable. Like, San does this thing where she's like, I'm gonna visit you sometimes, and we're gonna have tons of sex, but then I'm gonna fuck off back to the forest because I still hate humans. And I'm just kind of like, so we learned nothing then. It's like, what is she talking about? Again, it's just like, it just kind of ends. And like with this feeling that like a lot of things weren't quite resolved. And you can argue, and like that, like that's kind of how like real life goes, where like nothing's really resolved entirely. But like, this is a film, like you're supposed to have like a clear established ending. And I feel like Miyazaki films, and especially Princess Mononoke, struggle with this, where like, there are all these implications as to what's going to happen, and yet like it's not really necessary, and it doesn't really like add anything to the story. It just feels as if like, instead of resolving the whole like Ashitaka and like, loving Ashitaka but hating humanity thing, San is just like, yeah, I'm gonna come, I'm gonna fuck you, and then I'm gonna leave. Every man's dream, right? It's just like, it just feels like the ending just isn't as good as it could be. And then like you kind of go into like the Mario movies where it feels like it does everything it needs to do. It's perfect from start to finish. Like it understands like, how to open the film. It knows how to set things up. It knows it has a breakneck pace, and it has a satisfying ending that leaves room open for a sequel. And this is why the Mario movies, I think, are better than Miyazaki or like, Studio Ghibli in general, is that like, they're branching out and they're doing all of these things while, in a lot of ways, Princess Mononoke is a remake of like Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, which I have not seen. But like, the fact of the matter is, like, Nintendo is making sequels and new things while Ghibli's kind of like making pseudo remakes based on things they've already done. Like the difference in quality is just kind of palpable. Oh yeah, The Lion King. Yeah. So, The Lion King is actually the movie that made me want to do this video, because I watched it again, because it was actually the last animated movie I wanted to watch before I kind of made my decision. And yeah, it's not that good. Like, it's very, very interesting watching this as an adult, because, Scar is showing all these signs of, like, hating Mufasa. He's jealous of Mufasa. He's openly telling Mufasa how he should have been next in line for the throne. Like, he's going to the hyenas. He's doing all this underhanded thing. He puts Simba in danger. All Simba would have had to do is just be like, hey, Scar told me about the elephant graveyard, and that's why I wanted to go. And then Mufasa would have, like, confronted Scar, and that would have been the end of it, right? If Mufasa just thought that, like, maybe my brother is jealous of my position as king, like, maybe that would have solved the entire plot. But no, like, the movie just wants to do this thing where it's just like Simba is just, Mufasa dies and Simba is driven away, not killed, even though like Scar could have just easily just gone like and just snapped his neck right there. Simba fucks off. He comes back. He takes his throne back. It's very odd in how it's structured because like you're telling me the animals worship lions, their natural predators. Because there's this weird scene like early on where Mufasa's training Simba to pounce, and he uses Zazu, his right hand man, as like target practice, and it creates this weird setup of just how these animals are just subservient to like their natural predators. And Mufasa has this weird cope where he's just like, well, you see, Simba, like when we die, we become grass. And then like the antelope eat the grass. And that's how the circle of life is totally justified. And I'm just like, this sounds like a religious cope. Like your body turns to grass? Like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Like, there wasn't any grass in that valley. Like, what are you talking about? So, like, anyway, there aren't going to be any antelope going down there. Like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? So, yeah, like, The Lion King is, it's a very good example of just how derivative Disney is of other properties. Because this basically is just Hamlet, where, like, he just wins at the end. He kills his brother and, like, takes the throne. It's, like, there's no real thought put into it, okay? There's no real, like, creativity here. It's just Hamlet with lions and a Disney ending. Like, that's it. And people hype this movie up, I think because it's the first movie that a lot of people see. Okay, like that's just the reality of it. It's not particularly like thought-provoking or interesting or unique. Like it's memorable for like, some shocking imagery, some good animation, and like the music, but the simple fact of the matter is it pales in comparison to the far superior Super Mario Bros. Movies, which have better action, which have more original plots, which have better characters, which have a more interesting vibe in general. Like, The Lion King is just a relic of the 90s. Something that people only glaze because they grew up with it, and not because of its actual quality. Yeah, I had to skip a lot of the entries on the list because, I've been going for an hour now. I've been talking about this incessantly. I've been going for an hour now talking about all these movies. And, like, there's a lot of things I could say, but a lot of it, like, kind of leans to the things I've already said about Disney, about DreamWorks, about sequels and stuff like that. I already talked extensively about Spirited Away. I've talked about, like, Pixar, what I think of them. The Iron Giant I haven't seen in years. Fantasia is great, but Fantasia is basically a giant music video and isn't really comparable to, like, a movie with an actual 3-act structure, okay? Like, an actual feature-length film. Like, Fantasia is great animation, but it's not really, like, a story like, traditional films. Like, I love Fantasia, but can't really be compared to the Mario movie. So that kind of goes into, like, the number one most critically acclaimed movie ever made, Toy Story. One of the most overhyped pieces of shit I've ever seen in my life. Like, this is the bane of my existence, the Lion King of Pixar, the film that everybody worships and everyone glazes, Toy Story. Why? Is it because of the characters? Is it because of the story? Is it because of anything? No. Like, the reason why this film is so beloved is that it was a CG film that came out in 1995. That's it. It was a completely computer-generated film. It had, like, fully 3D character models. It looked way better than, like, hand-drawn animation. It looked more real. And as a result of that, because of the improving technology, it was seen as a major innovator and a major trendsetter. Okay, like, again, there are so many films on this list that are better than Toy Story, that are more creative than Toy Story, that are like, Princess Mononoke is a really good example where, that film came out later, was hand drawn, and is way better, but it's not computer generated, so nobody gave a shit about it. Toy Story is the Last of Us of animation, in the sense where it is only glazed because of its visuals, because of how it looks, and not because of anything that actually happens in it. Because, Woody is actually kind of an asshole. Buzz is kind of an idiot. The entire situation is kind of contrived. Like the film just doesn't really do a whole lot to stand on its own merits outside of the visuals, right? It is only remembered because of the animation. And of course, that's kind of that it has its place in history. This is like, the primary method of animation today. Like, it was an innovator at the time, but much like Citizen Kane was back in the 40s, like or King Kong back in the day, like we have to understand that the industry has moved on and that other better films like the Mario movie have come out since then. And of course, this all applies to like the sequels of Toy Story as well, which increasingly become more contrived and more ridiculous. But like, Toy Story is something that, much like The Lion King, people saw when they were very, very young and grew very, very attached to it and just had this weird fixation that, like, Toy Story is this, like, formative thing. And the reality of it is that, like, it really isn't that special. It's not all that interesting. It's not all that fun. The characters aren't all that well written. Like, your attachment to it is just based purely on nostalgia, and you're not really willing to think about, like, the flaws or problems that Toy Story has at its core. Like, the simple fact of the matter is, a lot of the adults who watch this film are only attached to it out of a sense of misplaced nostalgia and not because of its actual quality. I imagine a lot of the people who glazed this film haven't seen it since, maybe since Toy Story 3 came out. Okay, like this film is remembered fondly because it was a big deal at the time, and people grew up. People who are growing up now, like, saw it when it came out at the time and was blown away by it at the time. But if you're like me and you go back to it as an adult, you really do start to see just how it doesn't leave that much of an impact. The short runtime, the dated animation, the lackluster plot, the behavior of some of the characters, like, it's just very, very frustrating. Toy Story is, in a lot of ways, indicative of Disney Pixar as a whole, in that it is hyped up and worshipped in spite of the fact that it cannot possibly live up to its own hype. So yeah, I just went through IMDb's top 100 animated films of all time list. And yeah, the Super Mario Bros. Movie and the Super Mario Galaxy movie are quite a bit better than pretty much all of them. There is nothing on this list that I would say is better than either of those films. So the Mario movie and the Mario Galaxy movie can now be considered the greatest animated films of all time. There isn't really any arguing otherwise. Like, again, we're going to slowly see this happen over the next 10, 20, 30 years as Nintendo keeps putting out more Mario movies, and they keep putting out more films, and they keep putting out more material. These movies are going to, like, age quite a bit better than I think all of these Disney films. Like, do you think people are going to give a shit about Up or, like, WALL-E, like, 30 years from now? Bull fucking shit. It's not going to happen. WALL-E looks more and more ridiculous every year. The simple fact of the matter is, like, the Mario movies are gonna be, like, beloved by children for generations purely because they understand what a movie should actually be. In that it should be fun, it should be exciting, it should leave an impact, it should it should have good animation, it should be something that's made to entertain, not push a message. And I do think that is, like, the primary issue when it comes to, like, animation and how it's critiqued and viewed by the public. Because something like Up, something like WALL-E, they aren't beloved because they're good movies. They're beloved because they push the right message. And that's a trend you see throughout this entire list, is that they're not beloved because they're good films. They're beloved because they're propaganda, because they push the message, because this is something to advance the woke political agenda that's subverted our culture for the past, like, 60 years. And the Mario movie, I think, is the first major blockbuster film series ever that kind of bucks that trend. And I think that's a big reason why it is going to go down as one of the all-time great film productions. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.